Hello and welcome to the final episode of Cold Case Christmas 2023. Except it isn't quite. There's going to be a bonus episode of this series in 2 days' time on the 26th. So stay to the end to find out what that case is going to be. In this episode, we're going to talk about a little boy who was dropped off at his kindergarten class by his dad, as usual. Nothing was untoward whatsoever about that day. But unfortunately, that was the last time that James Pitzen saw his son. Because shortly afterwards, that little boy's mother picked him up to take him on a whirlwind tour of water parks. She was found days later in a hotel room, having taken her own life. And the whereabouts of that little boy are unknown to this day. This is the strange disappearance of Timmothy Pitzen. James Pitzen was a cancer survivor. He didn't believe he could have children. When he got together with Amy, who had been married 3 times before, they were surprised, pleasantly surprised, that one day Amy found out she was pregnant. Timmothy Pitzen was born in Aurora, Illinois, on October 18th, 2004. And he was the pride and joy of both Amy and James. Amy had suffered from depression, and after Timothy was born, she seemed to be doing a lot better. Until she wasn't. Because depression is an evil disease. It creeps up on you slowly, and it can create all kinds of havoc in your life, in your relationships. And James and Amy's relationship had become quite rocky. So we turn to April the 11th, 2011. And as I said in the introduction, Timothy was dropped off at his kindergarten class at Greenman Elementary School by James as usual. Amy went back to collect Timothy between 8:10 and 8:15 a.m, citing a non-existent family emergency. She dropped her vehicle off at a repair shop at 10 a.m, and an employee at that repair shop drove Amy and Timothy to Brookfield Zoo while the car was having repairs. They went back, retrieved their vehicle about 3 p.m, and then they drove north to Key Lime Cove Resort in Gurney, where they spent the night. The day after, Amy drove Timothy to the Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin. And there they were spotted on security footage in the checkout line at 10 a.m. the next day, so that would be May the 13th. Timothy was alive and well then, but that was the very last time Timothy was seen on any surveillance footage. But we do know that Timothy was alive after 10 a.m. because between about midday and 1:30 p.m. on that day, May 13th, Amy phoned several family members, including her mother and her brother-in-law, so that would be James's brother, telling them that she and Timothy were safe and were not in any danger, and Timothy was heard in the background. Cell phone records indicate that those calls were made in northwest Sterling, Illinois, near Route 40. So they were coming back south. So it looked like potentially Amy was on her way home, except she wasn't. Notably absent from these phone calls was Amy calling James, because she was mad with James. Because of their rocky relationship, they'd considered splitting up. Amy was afraid that James would take Timothy away from her because of her depression, because of her struggles. And James was also mad because in previous months, Amy had rekindled a friendship with her first husband. And James wasn't happy with that. But they kind of got things back on track in their relationship, and things were kind of muddling along until they weren't. So Amy was mad with James, and she was scared perhaps that Timothy would be taken away from her. and maybe because her depression was perhaps more severe than anybody realised, including her. Mental illness has a way to distort your thinking and make you do things that you wouldn't normally dream of doing. And sadly, it was the end of the road for Amy Pitzen. At 7:25 p.m. on May 13th, Amy was seen alone on security cameras at a Family Dollar store in Winnebago, Illinois, where she purchased a pen, notepaper, and envelopes. At 8 p.m, she was seen at Sullivan's food store, again in Winnebago, on her own. At 11:15 p.m, she checked in to the Rockford Inn at Rockford, Illinois, where sometime over that night she took her own life by slashing her wrists and neck and overdosing on antihistamines. On May 14th, her body was found by a horrified hotel maid, along with a note. In the note, Amy apologised for the mess she created and explained that Timothy would never be found, but was safe with people who would care for him. So an investigation into the death of Amy Pitzen and into the disappearance of Timmothy Pitzen got underway. Police found that the knife that Amy had used to slash her wrists and her throat contained only her blood. However, in the back of her vehicle was a considerable amount of blood from Timothy. Family members explained that Timothy suffered from nosebleeds, as many children do, and sometimes those nosebleeds were, nosebleeds create quite a lot of blood, don't they? Sometimes they pump blood, and they believe that that blood was actually from a nosebleed. The vehicle also was tested for materials on the wheels and on the bumpers, and investigators sent dust, plants and other material found underneath Amy's vehicle to scientists at Microchase. Based on sediments and plant materials, the scientists could conclude that Amy's Ford Expedition had been stopped, we don't know how long for, but on a gravel shoulder or a gravel road, next to or near to an asphalt secondary road, which had been treated with glass road marking beads. They were also able to determine that this vehicle had been backed onto a grassy meadow. Possibly Queen Anne's lace and black mustard plants were growing nearby. The scientists concluded that this kind of grass wasn't a residential lawn or a park. There was a strong likelihood it was close to water, a small stream or a creek. No corn pollen was found, which enabled them to narrow the search down even further, so not a farmer's field. Most likely located in northwestern Illinois, with Lee and Whiteside counties being the most likely locations. However, other counties nearby couldn't completely be ruled out. With such a detailed description of where Amy might have stopped, investigators released this information to the public, hoping that somebody somewhere would recognise the description of the area and potentially even Amy's vehicle being stopped in that area. They encouraged people in rural areas in those counties to check their own land for any kind of evidence that a vehicle had been backed into, or disturbed earth where a body might have been buried, trail cam footage, that kind of thing. Timothy's Spider-Man backpack, his toys and a tube of toothpaste that Amy had purchased for Timothy during the trip were also missing, so people were asked to check their land for those kind of items as well. But nothing. Absolutely nothing. Amy's phone was missing. Wasn't in the hotel room, wasn't in her vehicle. So obviously she'd discarded it somewhere. However, investigators were able to track Amy's cell phone calls and credit card receipts and collect surveillance video from locations on her route. 2 years later, in 2013, Amy's phone was found beside Route 78, and they hoped that now they had the physical phone itself, they will be able to glean more information from it, but sadly not. They did find a Yahoo email account that James wasn't aware of, but that was largely spam. And there were some deleted emails, but they were able to recover those because Yahoo at the time didn't keep deleted emails on their servers. Over the years, there have been various sightings of little boys that might be Timothy, but none have been confirmed to be him. In 2019, there was a cruel hoax. A man in his 20s pretended to be Timmothy Pitzen, but DNA testing proved that that wasn't him, it was just some nut job. 12 years later, James Pitzen is still waiting for news about his son. Did Amy take Timothy's life? Did she believe, in the throes of mental illness, that she was doing the best for him by taking him out of this world and then joining him a few hours later? Or did she give him away in some kind of illegal adoption? It's possible. There were Amish communities along the route that Amy had taken, so Amish communities, as much as can be, were investigated, but they lead a very secluded lifestyle. So Amy giving Timothy to one of these secluded communities, in my opinion, is probably quite high. Way higher than just a regular family, because Timothy was 6. He would know who he was. He would remember his whole life. So surely sooner or later he'd say something to somebody. So unless Timothy is living in a very secluded community, after all this time, I have to think that maybe Amy did take Timothy's life, and sadly his remains have never been recovered. I hope not. I sincerely hope that Timothy is alive somewhere and one day find his dad and they can be reunited. But until that day, we just have to live in hope that one day the whereabouts of Timmothy Pitzen, alive or dead, will be found, and it will give James and the family closure, or a really happy reunion. We all hope for that, don't we? Okay guys, that's it for this year's Cold Case Christmas, except for the bonus episode that's going to come out in a couple of days, and that is the disappearance of Patrick Warren and David Spencer from Chelmsley Wood in the Midlands in the UK. They've become known as the Milk Carton Kids, and they disappeared on the 26th of December 1996. So we're going to talk about that case on the day they disappeared. I hope you've enjoyed this year's Cold Case Christmas. There is a playlist, so you can go back and binge watch them. If you've missed episodes, they're easy to find. So I'll see you in a couple of days for the very final episode of Cold Case Christmas 2023. Bye guys.